November 14th, 1965. John Wayne's private office in Encino, California. 11:47 in the evening. The lamp on the corner of his desk was the only light in the room. His secretary had gone home 3 hours ago. His business manager had called twice. Wayne let it ring. The rest of the house was quiet and dark, the way it only gets when a man has asked everyone to leave him alone. He was sitting at his desk in a plain work shirt and jeans, not moving, not pouring a drink, not reaching for the phone. He was holding a letter. He had read it 4 times already. The envelope was nothing, plain white, no return address, postmarked Kingman, Arizona. It had come in with that week's mail stack. Fan requests, script submissions, business proposals, a studio contract his lawyer needed back by Friday. His assistant, Paul Wheeler, had almost tossed it. Arthur Landau, Wayne's business manager, had standing instructions. Widow letters go in the discard pile. Hollywood attracts them like moths to a flame, Landau had said more than once. Emotional, manipulative. Don't let them reach the Duke. Wheeler had pulled this one out anyway. He couldn't say exactly why. Something about the handwriting, careful, unhurried, the penmanship of a woman who chose every word slowly. He left it on top of Wayne's desk without a note. Wayne had opened it at 9 o'clock. It was nearly midnight now, and he still hadn't moved. For a long moment, the only sound in that room was the faint hiss of the lamp. 6'4", 57 years old, the biggest name in Hollywood, sitting perfectly still, holding a single sheet of lined paper like it weighed something. Because it did. Before we go any further, tell me something. Have you ever read a few sentences that reached right through your chest before you understood why? Drop it in the comments. Because what John Wayne read that night stopped the toughest man in Hollywood cold, and it was only 3 paragraphs long. He set the letter down, stared at it. Then he picked up the phone and dialed. When Paul Wheeler answered, Wayne's voice was quiet and flat, the way it got when something had already been decided. I need everything you can find on a woman named Dorothy Freely in Kingman, Arizona. Property records, bank records, anything the county has by morning, and don't tell Landau. He hung up. He opened his desk drawer and placed the letter inside, on top of an old photograph that had lived in that drawer for 40 years. He didn't look at the photograph, he never looked at it on purpose. But he always knew it was there. And tonight, Dorothy Freely had just reached through that drawer and touched something Wayne had spent half a century trying to keep buried. The story didn't start with that letter. It started 14 months earlier on a 2-lane highway outside Kingman, Arizona, on a Tuesday morning in September 1964, when a cattle truck crossed the center line and killed Robert Freely instantly. He was 38 years old. He left behind a wife, a daughter named Clara, age 9, and a son named James, age 6, and a ranch that was already 3 mortgage payments behind. Dorothy Freely was not a woman who asked for help. That needs to be understood first. She was the daughter of a Korean War veteran raised in Flagstaff on the principle that you worked for what you had and you did not extend your hand to strangers. She taught Sunday school. She kept Robert's work boots by the back door for 8 months after he died because she couldn't bring herself to move them. She told her children every morning that things were going to be fine. She believed, for a while, that saying it enough times would make it true. By February 1965, the Mojave County Bank had sent 3 notices. The ranch, 340 acres, a modest house, a small cattle operation Robert had spent 11 years building, was heading toward foreclosure unless Dorothy could produce $4,200 in back payments by spring. She sold Robert's truck. She sold the secondary cattle. She took in sewing from 3 neighbors. She asked her brother in Tucson for a loan. He sent $300 and an apology letter. By October, the final notice had arrived. 60 days. What Dorothy didn't know was that her 9-year-old daughter, Clara, had been writing to John Wayne since the summer, not asking for money. She was 9. She didn't know about money. She wrote because her father had loved Wayne's films, because every Saturday the Freely family had driven into Kingman to watch whatever picture was showing, because The Searchers was the last movie Robert ever watched with his children, 2 weeks before the accident. Clara wrote to Wayne the way a child writes to the only hero she has left. She never told her mother. When Dorothy finally found the letters, she didn't write to ask for anything. She wrote to apologize, and that letter, a desperate widow asking forgiveness for her grieving daughter's audacity in reaching out at all, was the one sitting in John Wayne's desk drawer right now, next to a photograph he never looked at on purpose, and by morning he was going to know exactly why it had broken something open inside him that he thought was sealed shut forever. Paul Wheeler had the county records on Wayne's desk by 7 the next morning. Dorothy Freely. 340 acres, Mojave County. Outstanding mortgage balance, $4,200. Bank account balance, $340. Foreclosure date, January 17th, 1966, 63 days away. The ranch would go to auction. Dorothy and the 2 children would have nowhere to go. Wheeler set the file down without a word and waited. Wayne read it once, closed it, and picked up the phone. Arthur Landau arrived at the Encino house by 9. He listened to Wayne for 4 minutes without interrupting, which was unusual for him. Then he set down his coffee and spoke carefully, the way a man speaks when he is trying to sound reasonable while actually saying no. "Duke, I understand. It's a sad situation. But if word gets out that you responded to this, you'll have 500 widows writing you by Christmas. You cannot save every failing ranch in Arizona." Wayne looked at him. "I'm not talking about every ranch. I'm talking about this one." Landau shook his head slowly. "It's not smart." Wayne didn't answer. Mary St. Clair, his publicist, had a different concern. She called at 10. An election year was approaching, Wayne was politically visible, and his name in connection with any financial transaction, however generous, was ammunition for someone. "If you do it quietly, it looks like you're hiding something. If you do it publicly, it looks like you're buying goodwill," she said. Her advice was simple. Send a signed photograph and a form letter. Standard procedure. Move on to the next picture. Wayne heard them both out. He didn't argue with either of them. What they didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that in 1914, when Wayne was 7 years old, the Morrison family lost their farm in Palmdale, California. The bank took everything. Wayne remembered the drive away from that house. He remembered his father's hands on the steering wheel. He remembered what a man looks like when the ground disappears beneath him. He had never spoken about it publicly. But Dorothy Freely's letter had reached directly into 1914 and pulled that memory up by the root. Before we go further, if you have never heard this story, what Wayne did in the next 48 hours is something Hollywood has never talked about openly. Hit that like button right now, because the 4 instructions he gave Paul Wheeler behind a closed door are the reason this story almost stayed buried forever. Wheeler was called in at noon. Wayne closed the office door. He spoke. Wheeler wrote. When Wayne finished, Wheeler looked up from his notepad and said quietly, "Duke, are you absolutely certain about this?" Wayne held his gaze for a long moment. "Don't ask me that again." What was written on that notepad would not surface for 54 years, until the one person who had been in that room finally decided the world deserved to know. Paul Wheeler spoke publicly for the first time in 2019. He was 81 years old, living in Scottsdale, and he said he had kept the secret for 54 years because John Wayne had asked him to, and because some instructions you simply don't outlive. But Wayne was gone. Landau was gone. St. Clair was gone. And Wheeler said he was tired of a story that deserved to exist, dying quietly in a drawer. He remembered every word. The first instruction: wire $4,200 directly to the Mojave County Bank, account reference Freely Ranch, no sender name attached. The payment was to be listed in the bank's records as anonymous agricultural settlement and nothing further. The second instruction: arrange for a licensed contractor in Kingman to inspect the Freely Ranch and complete any structural repairs needed before winter. Roof, fencing, water systems, whatever the property required. All invoices to be routed through Wayne's production company in Burbank under general supply expenses. The third instruction: open a private education account at the First National Bank of Kingman in the names of Clara Freely and James Freely, funded at $6,000, accessible to each child individually when they turned 18. The fourth instruction, and Wheeler said this was the one he remembered most clearly, was the simplest. Under no circumstances was Dorothy Freely ever to be told where any of it came from. Not the mortgage payment, not the contractors, not the education accounts. Never. Not even after Wayne died. Wheeler looked down at his notepad when Wayne finished speaking. Then he looked up. "Duke, Are you absolutely certain?" Wayne held his eyes for a long moment without blinking. "Don't ask me that again." Wheeler never did. On December 2nd, 1965, Dorothy Freely received a call from Gerald Pitts at the Mojave County Bank. He told her that an anonymous third party had settled her outstanding mortgage balance in full. Dorothy asked him to repeat it. He did. She asked who had paid it. He said he wasn't authorized to say. She asked if it was her brother. He said he couldn't confirm or deny the source. Dorothy sat down on the kitchen floor, not a chair, the floor, and did not get up for 20 minutes. That evening, Clara came home from school and found her mother at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone completely cold. Dorothy told her the ranch was safe. Clara asked how. Dorothy said she didn't know. Clara thought about it for a moment, the way 9-year-olds do when they are working something out that adults have already given up on. Then she said, "I think Mr. Wayne did it." Dorothy told her that was a child's fantasy. Clara said, "I know, but I think it anyway." That night, a second envelope left a post office in Burbank, California, addressed to the Freely Ranch in Kingman, Arizona. No return address. One folded sheet inside. One handwritten sentence, no signature. Dorothy would not find it for 3 days. And when she did, she would read it once, fold it without a word, and place it in her Bible between the pages of Psalms, where it would remain untouched for the next 31 years until the morning her daughter Clara found it beside her mother's bed and understood in an instant everything Dorothy had known and never said. Dorothy Freely did not tell a single person what had happened. Not her brother in Tucson, not her pastor, not her closest friend in Kingman, a woman named Ruth Alderman who had sat with her through the worst nights after Robert died. Dorothy had no proof, only a feeling. And the feeling was so large and so private that saying it out loud would have made it smaller. So she kept it the way certain people keep the things that matter most, in silence, in the body, in the daily act of walking out to a ranch that should have been gone and finding it still there. 3 weeks after the mortgage was paid, a 2-man crew from a Kingman contracting firm arrived at the ranch. They resealed the roof, replaced the failing water pump, repaired the north fence line that Robert had been meaning to fix since spring. When Dorothy asked who had sent them, the foreman handed her a signed work order and said simply, "Ma'am, we're just here to do the work." The billing address on the order was a post office box in Burbank, California. Dorothy wrote it down on a notepad. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded the notepad and put it in the kitchen drawer and never looked at it again. Some things you choose not to chase, because chasing them might change what they mean. Clara graduated from Kingman High School in June 1974. That same month, the education account at First National Bank matured. $6,000, plus 9 years of interest. The bank told her it was an anonymous scholarship established in her name in December 1965. Clara assumed it was a local charitable fund. She didn't question it. She enrolled at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, studied education, and became a 6th-grade teacher. James received his account in 1977, vocational school in Phoenix. He became an electrician, came back to Kingman, and raised his family 3 miles from the ranch where he grew up. The land his father built, the land that should have been auctioned, the land that was still theirs because of 4 instructions written on a notepad in a closed office in Encino, California, on a November morning in 1965. Between that morning and his death in June 1979, John Wayne never mentioned Dorothy Freely, Kingman, Arizona, or the ranch in any interview, any recorded conversation, or any private correspondence his estate later made available. Paul Wheeler kept the secret because Wayne had asked him to. It existed in exactly 2 places, Wheeler's memory and Dorothy's Bible, and it would have stayed there forever. Most of you have never heard this story, and that is not an accident. Wayne made certain of it. If these are the stories you want to hear, the ones Hollywood buried, subscribe right now. Because what Clara found inside that Bible in the spring of 1997 is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. Dorothy died in March 1997 at 73 years old, in the same house she had shared with Robert on the same ranch the bank had scheduled for auction 31 years earlier. Clara drove in from Flagstaff the next morning. Going through her mother's belongings, she found the Bible on the nightstand just where Dorothy always kept it. She opened it and pressed flat between the pages of Psalms, Folded into a small, careful square was a single sheet of paper she had never seen before. She unfolded it slowly. Read the words written there. Sat down on the edge of her mother's bed and read them again. She recognized the handwriting immediately, not because she had seen it before, but because she had spent 20 years showing her students photographs of the man whose hand had formed every letter. She called her brother James that night and read it to him over the phone. There was a silence so long she thought the line had dropped. Then James said very quietly, "Mama knew the whole time, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. "And the 7 words on that page, no date, no signature, nothing else, are the reason this story has never left the Freely family. Until now." The sentence read, "Your children will not grow up the way I did." No name, no date, no explanation. 7 words on a plain sheet of paper, written in a hand that had signed 10,000 photographs, and never once signed this. Clara sat on the edge of her mother's bed and read it until the words stopped being words and started being something else entirely. This was not charity. This was not a celebrity writing a check to feel generous. This was a man reaching back 50 years into his own life and pulling out the one wound he had never shown anyone. The 7-year-old boy standing in a Palmdale doorway watching his father drive away from a farm the bank had taken, and using it, quietly and without witnesses, to make sure 2 children in Arizona never felt what he had felt. He couldn't sign it. Signing it would have made it about him, and it was never about him. Clara understood something else sitting in that room. Dorothy had known. Not in December 1965 when the call came from the bank. Maybe not when the contractors arrived, but at some point, maybe when the education accounts paid out, maybe just from the weight of the silence surrounding all of it, Dorothy Freely had worked out the truth, and she had chosen to carry it exactly the way Wayne had carried his own wound, privately, without asking for acknowledgement, without needing the story to have her name on it. James drove to the ranch that weekend, stood in the yard his father had worked, looked at the fence line repaired by strangers in December 1965. He was 6 years old when his father died. He had grown up on this land, raised his children on this land, because one man had decided on a quiet November night that a widow's apology was not something a decent person could simply fold up and discard. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Then he went inside. And neither he nor Clara told anyone what was written in that note for 22 more years, until Clara made a decision in 2019 that Dorothy never would have allowed, and changed the way an entire town remembered John Wayne forever. In the spring of 2019, Clara Freeman, born Clara Freely, walked into the Mojave Museum of History and Arts in Kingman, Arizona, carrying her mother's Bible, a folded sheet of paper, and a recorded testimony she and James had made together the previous winter. She donated all of it, not to the John Wayne Birthplace Museum in Iowa, not to any Hollywood archive or film foundation, to the local museum in the town where Dorothy Freely had raised 2 children on land that should have been taken from them 54 years earlier. The exhibit is small, a 1-glass case. Inside sits Dorothy's Bible open to Psalms, the note mounted carefully on acid-free backing, a photograph of the Freely Ranch taken in 1966, 1 year after the mortgage was paid, a photograph of Clara and James as adults, standing in the same yard their father once worked, and a typed card that reads, "In 1965, an anonymous benefactor saved this family's land. In 1997, they learned who it was. They have chosen to remember him not as a film star, but as a man who understood what it means to lose the ground beneath you." John Wayne made 142 films. He won an Oscar. He built a legend that has outlasted his century. But on a quiet November night in 1965, alone in a lamplit office with a widow's letter in his hand, none of that was what mattered. What mattered was that the boy who watched his father lose everything in Palmdale was still alive inside him, and he was not going to let it happen to someone else's children. That is the John Wayne nobody filmed. If this story moved you the way it moved me, subscribe and share it, and because the world is starving for men like that. And they don't make them like that anymore.